The mountains welcomed them with sunlight. Bright, blinding, reflected off the snow so intensely that it made them squint and laugh. The air was cold and alive, the kind that filled the lungs almost painfully and made you feel younger than you really were. Elena flew down the slope, feeling the wind tear loose strands of hair from beneath her helmet. Her skis obeyed perfectly. Her body moved easily, as if this day had been created for one thing only: speed, laughter, and freedom. "You're insane today," one of her friends shouted, catching up with her. "Do you even know how to slow down?" "I'm on vacation," Elena laughed, sharply cutting into a turn. "Everything is allowed here." They skied until exhaustion, fell, got back up, rushed downhill again, drank hot chocolate on the terrace, sitting right there in their ski boots, cheeks flushed, hair tousled by the wind. The day was lived fully, in a way that rarely happens in ordinary life. The restaurant was full. Panoramic windows opened onto dark mountains rising into the night like silent witnesses. Warm light, soft music, the clink of glasses. The resort was living its evening life. That was where they were noticed. Alexander was sitting at a table with two men. All three looked like people accustomed to the best things in life, calm, confident, without any need to display their status. But even among them, he stood out. Tall, reserved. His gaze was attentive, assessing, but never intrusive. He noticed Elena almost immediately. Not because she was trying to draw attention, quite the opposite. There was something different about her. Naturalness, a quiet beauty that didn't ask to be confirmed. "Interesting company," one of his friends remarked, following his gaze. Alexander gave a faint smile. "Yes." A few minutes later, the waiter approached Elena and her friends. "The gentlemen at that table were wondering if you wouldn't mind joining tables," he said politely. "It's quite busy tonight. It would be more comfortable." The girls exchanged glances. "Why not?" one of them shrugged. "We don't bite." Elena felt a light, sweet tension, but she nodded. When they sat together, the atmosphere shifted. "Alexander," he said, extending his hand. "Elena." Something happened in that brief touch. The conversation flowed easily. Skiing, the mountains, how strangely people open up when they're far from home. Alexander spoke little, but listened as if every word mattered. His gaze lingered longer than usual, yet never felt improper. "You ski well," he said suddenly. "I saw you today." Elena looked at him surprised. "You were watching?" "Involuntarily," he replied. "You stood out." Warmth spread through her, not from the wine. Later there was the bar. Dim light, music softer, closer to the body. He stood near her, sometimes too close. His hand brushed lightly against her back, as if testing whether she would pull away. She didn't. When he leaned in and said, "Come with me," she didn't ask where. They left the restaurant almost in silence. Snow crunched softly under their steps. The night was clear and cold, as if the entire resort was holding its breath. Elena walked beside Alexander, feeling his presence not through touch, but through proximity, close enough to be unmistakable. The elevator rose slowly. The silence inside it was dense, stretched tight like a wire. Elena stood still, yet her breathing betrayed her. When the doors opened, he let her go first. The room was large and quiet, filled with soft light. Beyond the panoramic window, the mountains disappeared into darkness, snow shimmering faintly under distant lights. The warmth inside contrasted sharply with the cold outside. Alexander closed the door. The click of the lock sounded louder than it should have. He didn't approach her immediately. Elena stood still, aware of his gaze, not hungry, not rushed, studying. That made it stronger. "You're beautiful," he said simply, not as a compliment, as a fact. She stepped toward him first. The kiss didn't begin with lips, it began with the space between them, with hesitation, with the way his hand paused just short of her waist, giving her the chance to pull back. She didn't. His lips were warm, confident, unhurried. He kissed as if the night belonged to them, as if there was no need to rush. His palms settled against her back, lower, drawing her closer, and Elena felt her body respond instantly, without resistance. They didn't undress right away. Another kiss, her fingers at the buttons of his shirt, slow and uncertain, as if touching something forbidden. His breath deepened when the fabric slipped from his shoulders. He touched her as if learning her, shoulders, neck, the line of her collarbone. Every movement was deliberate, almost careful, and it sent a shiver through her skin. When he undressed her, Elena felt a brief flash of vulnerability, and at the same time a strange calm, as if with him there was no need to pretend. He laid her down gently, never breaking eye contact. In his gaze was desire, control, and something dangerously alluring, the sense of a man used to taking what he wants. The night flowed without words. Warmth of bodies, broken breathing, his confident hands, her fingers gripping the sheets, moments when she forgot where she was and felt only him, close, above her, filling her space. He was attentive, adult, unhurried. When it was over, they lay beside each other, barely touching, listening to their breathing slowly return to normal. Elena stared at the ceiling, thinking that this night felt too real to be accidental. She fell asleep with his warmth beside her, and in the morning he was gone. Elena woke up alone. The bed beside her was cold. For a few seconds she didn't move. She simply lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar silence of the room. No breath beside her, no weight on the mattress, no quiet presence she had fallen asleep with. She sat up slowly. The room looked exactly the same, immaculate, expensive, calm. The large bed, the soft light, the perfect order. And yet something was missing so clearly that it almost hurt to look around. She stood and walked to the panoramic window. Outside, the mountains were bathed in pale morning light. Snow-covered slopes stretched endlessly, calm and indifferent. The sky was clear, peaceful, as if nothing had happened during the night. Elena rested her forehead lightly against the glass. Too normal. She turned back. His side of the bed was untouched now, pillows straightened, sheets smooth. No note, no message, no sign that he had ever been there at all. Only the faint trace of his presence remained, a memory more than a scent. She wrapped her arms around herself, standing in the oversized white t-shirt, feeling strangely exposed in the quiet luxury of the suite. There was no regret, no shame, only an empty space where questions were beginning to form. She had spent the night with a man to whom everything was allowed, and who was not used to staying. She exhaled slowly, and for the first time since waking up she understood. This was not an ending. This was the beginning of something she did not yet know how to name. The resort was waking up slowly. The morning was clear, almost mockingly beautiful, the kind of morning that exists only in the mountains. The snow sparkled as if nothing had happened. The mountains stood still, confident in their eternity, and that only made the emptiness inside feel deeper. Elena was looking out the bus window and did not see the road. Her friends were talking about something, breakfasts, photos, how quickly these days had passed. Their voices sounded like background noise, as if coming from another reality. She nodded, smiled in the right places, but all of it happened automatically. Inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. She did not feel pain. She did not feel disappointment. There was not even resentment, only a strange, viscous emptiness, like after music that suddenly stops on its most beautiful chord. She caught herself thinking that she was not remembering the night itself, not the touches, not the kisses, but the sensations between them. His voice when he spoke quietly, the pauses, the way he looked at her as if he saw more than a casual encounter allowed. "Are you okay?" one of her friends asked, noticing her distant expression. "Yes," Elena answered too quickly. "I'm just tired." That was almost true. Her phone lay in her bag, silent. She did not take it out, did not check it, did not wait. And still she knew if he wrote, she would answer. And if he did not write, that thought broke off every time before it could reach the end. When the mountains disappeared behind them, it became easier to breathe, but easier did not mean better, just more familiar. Alexander had left earlier. He always left earlier. A private transfer, a precise schedule, no unnecessary movements. His wife was built to leave no space for accidents, and that was exactly why that night did not fit into any of his familiar patterns. He sat in the car, looking out the window, and for the first time in a long while, he did not open his laptop. His thoughts returned to her, not obsessively, but stubbornly, as if someone had put a short fragment on repeat, one that could not be turned off. Elena. Not a name, a sensation. He tried to analyze it, to find a rational explanation. Why she stayed in his memory longer than usual. Why he did not want to leave a note. Why he left without waking her. Because it was easier, he told himself. Because there was no need to explain. Because there was no need to continue. But that logic brought no relief. He remembered the way she looked in the morning, still half asleep, warm, trusting, as if there really had been something between them that went beyond a single night. And that was dangerous. Alexander was used to controlling consequences, but here the consequence already existed, inside him. He tightened his fingers slightly, as if pushing the thought away, and forced himself back into his usual state, even breathing, neutral expression, inner order. Work, meetings, numbers. Everything would return to its place. It had to. Days passed. Elena returned to her usual rhythm. Work, coffee, conversations, weekend plans. The world did not collapse. Life did not stop. But something in it had shifted, barely noticeable, yet permanent. She caught herself comparing. Other men seemed quieter, simpler, too predictable. She was angry at herself for that. It was just one night, she told herself, just a coincidence. But her body did not agree. Sometimes she woke up in the middle of the night with the feeling that someone had been there beside her. Sometimes she caught herself smiling at the memory of his gaze, and every time, irritation followed, because he was not supposed to stay, because he left and did it easily. Alexander did not speak about it either, to no one, not even fully to himself. He returned to his city, to his offices, to a life where everything followed rules. He was surrounded by people who had known him for years, who did not ask unnecessary questions, who accepted him as he was. And still, something did not align. He noticed pauses in his own reactions, delays, moments when his gaze caught on a silhouette in the street, a hair color, the intonation of a stranger's laughter. And every time, disappointment, not her. He told himself it was temporary, that memory simply had not cooled yet. But somewhere deeper, he already knew. That night did not end in the morning. It simply changed its form, into waiting. Without promises, without agreements, without the right to demand. And that was exactly what made it dangerous. Because sometimes the strongest feelings do not begin with love, but with the silence that comes after it. It didn't happen suddenly. And that was the strangest part. Elena felt his presence a few seconds before she saw him, as if the air in the room had changed, becoming denser, quieter, more focused. She lifted her eyes from her laptop almost automatically and froze. He was standing by the reception desk, slightly apart from the others, in a dark coat with that same calm expression that couldn't be faked. Alexander. Alive. Real. Not a memory. The world around them kept moving, people talking, passing by, elevator chimes ringing. But for her, all of it turned into background noise. She didn't take a single step, didn't smile, didn't look away. Their eyes met. He recognized her instantly. It showed in the brief moment when his external composure slipped, in the way his gaze lingered a fraction longer than acceptable, in something that flickered there, surprise, and was immediately brought under control. He hadn't expected this. Neither had she. Elena felt everything inside her tighten, not from joy, not from pain, from a sharp, almost physical realization. That night hadn't stayed in the mountains. It was here, between them. Elena, he said first. Her name sounded different in his voice than she remembered, lower, quieter, more careful. Alexander, she replied, and that was the end of their first collision. No hugs, no awkward smiles, no "how are you" or "good to see you," only a pause, a dangerous one. You... He took a step closer, then stopped. Do you work here? Yes, she answered calmly. Too calmly. I've been here a long time. He nodded as if that explained something, though it explained nothing. I didn't know, he said. Neither did I, she replied, and that was the truth. They stood a few steps apart, and Elena suddenly felt acutely aware of how much the distance between them had changed since that night. Back then, it had disappeared too quickly. Now, it existed too clearly. You look good, he finally said, not as a compliment, as a statement of fact. You too, she replied, and immediately regretted it, because something inside her shifted. They stood a few steps apart, and Elena suddenly felt how much the distance between them had changed since that night. Back then, it had disappeared too quickly. Now, it existed too clearly. You look good, he said at last, not as a compliment, as a statement of fact. You too, she replied, and immediately regretted it, because something inside her shifted. Do you have a minute? He asked after a pause. She glanced at her watch. I have a meeting, she said, in 10 minutes. He nodded. Then I'll wait. You don't need to, she said sharply. He looked at her more closely. Are you angry? Elena let out a short, joyless smile. No, she said, I'm just surprised. It was a gentle word. Too gentle. I left early, he said. I didn't want to... He stopped, and that silence was more honest than any explanation. You don't need to, she repeated. Really? She stood up. We're adults. It was a night. A good night, but it ended. He looked at her for a long moment, too long for a man who was used to letting go. It didn't end for me, he said quietly. Elena felt everything inside her tense. Then you should deal with that, she replied, on your own. She stepped past him, and she had almost walked away when he said, I'm the owner of this company. She stopped, slowly turned back. I know, she said. I already know. And she looked at him in a way that, for the first time in a long while, made him feel like he wasn't in control. And if you think that changes anything, she paused, you're wrong. He nodded. I don't think that, he said. I just want to talk, not as the owner, not as the man from that night. Then as who? She asked. He met her gaze directly. As someone who didn't leave the way he should have. The silence between them grew dense again. Elena exhaled. We'll talk, she said at last, but not now, and not here. When?
She thought for a second. "When we're both ready to hear answers," she replied, "not look for excuses." And she walked away. Alexander stayed where he was. For the first time in a long time, he didn't follow a woman, didn't insist, didn't accelerate the process, because he understood one thing. This meeting was not a continuation of that night. It was the beginning of something far more complicated, and avoiding it was no longer possible.
She almost passed him when he spoke again. "I'm the owner of this company." She stopped, turned back slowly. "I know," she said. "I already know." And the way she looked at him made him feel something unfamiliar for the first time in years. Not power, not control. "And if you think that changes anything," she paused, "you're wrong." He nodded. "I don't think it does," he said. "I just want to talk. Not as the owner, not as the man from that night." "Then as who?" she asked. He met her gaze. "As someone who didn't leave the way he should have." The silence between them grew dense again. Elena took a slow breath. "We'll talk," she said finally, "but not now and not here." "When?" She thought for a second. "When we're both ready to hear answers," she replied, "not look for excuses." And she walked away. Alexander remained standing. For the first time in a long while, he didn't follow a woman, didn't insist, didn't force the moment, because he understood the most important thing. This meeting wasn't a continuation of that night. It was the beginning of something far more complicated, and avoiding it was no longer possible. The office lived its usual rhythm, the soft hum of conversations, the smell of coffee, quick footsteps in the corridor, glass and metal, everything that created a sense of control. Elena liked this familiar structure. It made it easier not to feel. But today, even the air felt different. She noticed it before she saw his name in the calendar, a meeting with Alexander, official, professional, in the conference room on the 10th floor, with no reason for emotions. That was how it was supposed to be. She arrived 2 minutes early, a habit that saved her from unnecessary pauses. Printed documents were already on the table, charts, schedules, a folder with papers, everything precise, everything correct. If she focused on numbers, she wouldn't have to remember the mountains. The door opened almost silently. Alexander entered the room the way a man enters a place where he doesn't need to prove his right to be there. He had taken off his dark coat in the corridor. His suit fit perfectly, no loud luxury. His face was calm, composed, like at the reception desk that day, but now there was more effort in his calm than confidence. "Good morning," he said. His voice sounded even, professional, but Elena felt something respond inside her, not a memory of touch, but a memory of how he knew how to be close without raising his voice. "Good morning," she replied, just as evenly. He sat across from her. Between them, the table, the papers, the distance, and still Elena acutely felt his presence, as if he occupied not only the chair, but part of the space around it. "Let's get to business," he said calmly. The words were correct. Safe. She nodded, opened her laptop, and began speaking confidently about timelines, approvals, risks. She spoke the way she always did, clearly, to the point, without unnecessary emotion. Alexander listened attentively, without interrupting. Occasionally he asked clarifying questions, precise, almost without intonation. Everything would have gone perfectly if not for the small details. His gaze lingered on her a fraction of a second longer than the conversation required, not boldly, carefully, as if he were afraid of revealing himself, as if he understood that any extra emotion in this room would already be a violation of the rules. Elena caught these moments and immediately forced herself back to the text. She didn't want to think about why her heart was beating faster. She didn't want to know that the familiar feeling was returning. She was near a man who could afford anything, and that was exactly why she had to keep her distance.
At one point, he reached for the documents, and their fingers ended up too close. Just a centimeter, not even a touch. But Elena inhaled sharply, and that betrayed her more than any confession could. Alexander noticed. Nothing changed in his expression, only his gaze became deeper, quieter. He moved the papers aside carefully, as if apologizing with the gesture. "Everything is clear," he finally said, closing the folder. "Thank you. You managed the project very well." You. A formal word, meant to build a wall. And it did. But Elena felt something strange, as if that wall didn't protect them. It brought them closer, because now every unnecessary word was dangerous. She stood up first. "If there are no further questions." "There is." And he stopped her with that single short word. Elena froze, slowly turned back. Alexander wasn't smiling. He wasn't playing. He was looking at her very carefully, as if he were deciding what could be said without destroying everything. But he didn't say anything personal. He only added, "Work-wise, that's all. Everything else, not here." And Elena understood. He felt the boundary too, and he saw it.
She left the conference room and immediately quickened her pace. The corridor was too bright, too ordinary, too full of people. She needed to dissolve into movement so she wouldn't think about what he had said. Everything else, not here. She was almost at the elevator when she heard footsteps behind her. Not hurried, not intrusive, just confident. She didn't turn around right away, as if she could pretend she didn't hear. "Ilyana," he said. No last name, no please, no title. She closed her eyes for a second and turned around. Alexander stopped at a distance, close enough to speak quietly, far enough for it not to look like pressure. "I'm not going to make a scene," he said calmly. "I need 2 minutes." "You chose a bad place," she replied. Her voice was even, but inside everything was trembling, not with weakness, but with restraint. He nodded. "Then the elevator," he said, and pressed the button. The doors opened almost immediately. They stepped inside. No one else. Cold light, a mirrored wall, silence. The elevator began to descend slowly, as if deliberately stretching the seconds. Elena stared at the floor numbers and tried to keep her face neutral. "I didn't want it to end like this," Alexander said quietly. She didn't turn toward him. "It ended the way you made it end," she replied. A pause. "I left early," he repeated, "and that was wrong." Elena gave a short, humorless smile. "Wrong?" she asked. "You even have a word for it." He stayed silent. And in that silence there was no excuse, only acknowledgement. "I'm not apologizing," he finally said, "because I understand it doesn't fix anything. I just want you to know I didn't forget." Elena turned toward him sharply. "And what do you want?" she asked. "For me to say it's fine? For us to repeat it? For me to pretend that this was just—" She stopped, because anything further would already be too personal. Alexander looked at her calmly, but there was tension in his eyes. Not anger, not the desire to win, more like a struggle with himself. "I want to talk," he said quietly. "Honestly." "Here?" Elena breathed. "No," he answered. "Not here. Not in the office. Not like this." The elevator stopped. The doors opened. They stepped out and immediately found themselves in a quieter lobby with fewer people around. Elena took a step forward, but he didn't follow her, didn't touch her, didn't stop her. He only said, "You're angry with me." She froze. "I'm not angry with you," she said slowly. "I'm angry that all of this was real, and you left as if it meant nothing." For the first time, something she had been holding inside broke through her voice. Alexander stayed silent, as if allowing her to speak. That was dangerous, because in moments like that, it's easy to cross the line. "I can't," she said more quietly. "We can't." He nodded. "I know." You're the owner of the company. I know. I don't want to be one of... She stopped, not finishing the sentence, but he understood. I don't see you that way, he said. Elena looked straight into his eyes. That changes nothing, Alexander. This isn't about how you see me. It's about the fact that there are rules around us and consequences. He took a barely noticeable step closer and stopped himself. Then tell me what you want, he said quietly. Not as an employee, as a woman. Elena felt the air grow dense. This was it, the boundary. She could say something that would change everything. She could let him come closer. She could repeat the night in a different place, in a different time. But she took a breath and said, I want you not to break my life with your I can, even if it seems to you that now you've learned how to be careful. Alexander looked at her calmly, but there was tension in his eyes. Not anger, not the desire to win, more like a struggle with himself. All right, he said, then I won't push, and added, almost in a whisper, but I don't promise I'll be able to forget.
In the evening, the apartment was too quiet. Elena took off her shoes, hung up her coat, turned on the light, and immediately turned it off again. The brightness irritated her. She switched on only the small lamp by the sofa, as if half darkness could hide her thoughts. She made tea and forgot it in the kitchen, sat on the edge of the sofa and stared at one spot for a long time. His words kept returning in her mind. Tell me what you want. She wanted something simple. She wanted a man who didn't disappear in the morning, who didn't leave behind emptiness that slowly turns into habit, who knew how to be not only strong, but human. And that was exactly why she understood. She couldn't. The ban was not external. It lived inside her, because she already knew how it ends when a man with power begins to want, and the world quietly rearranges itself around his desire. Elena did not want her life to become someone else's whim. Her phone lay nearby, silent. She wasn't waiting for a message, and yet her eyes kept drifting toward it, as if checking whether something had changed. Each time irritation flared inside her, at herself, at him, at that damn night in the mountains that had suddenly become not a memory, but a beginning. She stood up and went to the mirror. Her face looked calm, too calm. It's just a man, she told herself, just one person. But her body didn't believe it. Her body remembered how hot it became next to him, even on a winter night. Alexander returned home late. The apartment greeted him with silence, the kind that usually made thinking easier. He was used to solitude, to a life where everything was under control. Schedule, people, decisions, consequences. Tonight, control came harder. He took off his watch and placed it on the table too sharply, opened his laptop and closed it immediately. Numbers didn't help. The memory of her surfaced not as an image, but as a sensation. Her gaze, the pause, the way she said, "We can't." He hated when someone set boundaries for him, but this time it was different. Her boundary didn't irritate him, it commanded respect, and that was more dangerous. Because respect makes you hold back, desire pulls you closer. He picked up his phone, found her contact, and froze. Typed, "I need to talk." Deleted it. Typed, "I don't want to pressure you." Deleted it. Typed, "I'm thinking about you." Deleted it. He stared at the empty line and suddenly understood. He didn't know how to exist in a situation where he had no right to demand, and that was exactly why he wanted her more. Alexander put the phone down and walked to the window. The city shimmered below, alive and indifferent. "This can't be," he said quietly. Not to her, to himself. But the ban didn't make it easier. It made it brighter. The night stretched slowly. Elena lay in bed, listening to the quiet sounds of the apartment. The faint clicks of the heating system,
a distant car passing somewhere below, the rhythm of her own breathing growing too loud in the silence. She picked up her phone again, opened her messages. Nothing. She could have written first. She could have pretended it was just a conversation, just 2 minutes, just coffee. But she knew, with him, just was never just. With him, every just became a choice. She placed the phone back on the nightstand and turned toward the wall. And she told herself, silently, not yet. Not because she didn't want to, but because she wanted it too much and wasn't ready to pay the price. At the same time, Alexander sat in the armchair in his office, the lights turned off. Only the city lights reflected in the glass. His phone lay nearby. He picked it up again, opened her contact, and again did not write. His life was built on victories, on getting what he wanted. But tonight, for the first time, he understood something else. Sometimes the most adult choice is not to take. Not because you can't, but because if you do, you will destroy something. He put the phone down and closed his eyes. Inside him was a strange feeling. Not relief, a pause, a conscious pause. And somewhere deep within, for the first time in a long while, appeared not the desire to control, but the desire to deserve. Not a night, not a repetition, but the right to stay. Just not today. For now. Because sometimes closeness is the decision not to take a step today. The band did not disappear. It simply became quieter. Elena did not notice it right away. Not that evening, not that night. Rather, in small things. In the way she stopped flinching when she heard his name. In the way she stopped replaying their conversation again and again. In the way a dangerous feeling appeared inside her. I have the situation under control. That was always the most dangerous moment. A week passed. They did not see each other, did not write, did not even catch each other's gaze in the corridors, as if the office itself was helping them keep their distance. Elena immersed herself in work, took on additional tasks, stayed late, returned home exhausted, but with a clear head. That was what she told herself. In reality, clarity was an illusion. It was numbness. She caught herself waiting, not for a message, no, for a coincidence. Not, he will write, but something will happen. As if life itself was supposed to decide for them. Alexander sensed the approaching breakdown earlier. He knew this feeling, like a slight pressure under the skin, like tension in the shoulders that no amount of exercise could release. He worked more than usual, held meetings one after another, made decisions quickly and sharply, the way he knew how. But in the evenings, when the office emptied and the city beyond the windows began to live its own life, control weakened. He caught himself searching for her in reflections of glass, in voices, in pauses between thoughts. He did not want her body. He wanted to break the pause. That was worse. The breakdown began quietly. Not in a dramatic moment, not with a decision, but with fatigue. Alexander felt it coming earlier than she did. He recognized the sensation well. A subtle pressure beneath the skin, tension in the shoulders that no workout could release. He worked more than usual, moved from meeting to meeting, made decisions quickly and sharply, the way he always had. But in the evenings, when the office emptied and the city outside the windows slipped into its own life, control weakened. He caught himself searching for her in reflections on glass, in voices, in the pauses between thoughts. He didn't crave her body. He wanted to break the silence. That was worse. It happened in the evening. Late, unnecessary, the kind of evening that could easily have been canceled, and that was precisely why it became a trap. Elena left the office almost last. The elevator moved slowly, as if deliberately stretching the seconds. She stood leaning against the wall, feeling the exhaustion finally catch up with her. The doors opened. Alexander was standing in the lobby. Without his jacket, in a shirt, the top button undone. Not corporate, not formal, human. She stopped. He lifted his head, and there was no surprise in his gaze, no calculation, only fatigue and something too honest to be safe. "You're leaving," he said. Not a question, an observation. "Yes," she answered. "It's late." "I know a place where we can have coffee," he said after a pause. "Not far from here. Nothing personal." There it was. The trap word. Nothing personal. Elena checked her watch, then looked at him. 10 minutes, she said. Just coffee. He nodded, too calmly. The place was quiet, almost empty, dim, the kind of place where conversations are softer than thoughts. They sat across from each other, holding their cups like anchors. The first minutes were filled with nothing. Work, traffic, the weather, and the longer they avoided the main thing, the heavier it became. "You're angry," he said finally. Elena looked up. "No," she replied. "I'm tired of pretending this means nothing." He didn't smile, didn't soften it. "Me too," he said quietly. Silence settled between them, not tense, but heavy, the kind in which decisions make themselves. "We shouldn't," she began. "I know. That's why I'm not asking." He looked straight at her. "I'm just here." And that was enough, because that was exactly what he should not have been. Elena felt something shift inside her, not sharply, but slowly, like a crack in ice beneath her feet. She understood everything, consequences, rules, tomorrow, but in that moment, something else mattered more. She was tired of being strong alone. "Come to my place," she said. The words came out quieter than her own breath. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at her as if giving her one last chance to step back. "Are you sure?" he asked. Elena nodded. "No," she said honestly, "but I still want to." He stood first. The apartment greeted them with silence. Too familiar, too intimate. Elena took off her coat, placed her bag down, and suddenly realized how much her hands were trembling. She turned away, as if adjusting the light, and in that moment felt him behind her. Not a touch, a presence. "We can stop," he said quietly. "If you say that one more time," she replied without turning around, "I really will stop." He didn't say it again. He took a step closer. When he touched her, lightly, almost weightlessly, it was worse than a kiss, because her body recognized him instantly, because memory was stronger than reason. She turned around. The kiss was sharp, not like in the mountains, without softness, without slowness. It was the kiss of two people who had held themselves back for far too long. She clenched his shirt. He pulled her against him as if afraid to let go, and at the same time knowing he was making a mistake. "This is wrong," she whispered as he kissed her neck. "Yes," he answered, "exactly because of that." The prohibition didn't collapse loudly. It collapsed quietly, in the way she let him take off her coat, in the way he didn't ask permission the second time, in the way she didn't pull away. This wasn't a night. It was a breakdown. Not beautiful, not romantic, real. And later, when Elena lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, she understood the most frightening thing. She didn't feel ashamed. She felt calm, and that meant only one thing. The prohibition no longer protected her. It had become part of the desire, and now there was no way back. The silence in the apartment came later. Not immediately. At first there was only breath, uneven, unsteady, and the slow return of reality. Elena lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet settle into the space around them. Alexander was beside her, not touching. That somehow made everything heavier. The room felt too familiar, too intimate, as if it had absorbed what had just happened and was now holding it, quietly, without judgment. Elena realized something then, something that frightened her more than the choice itself. she didn't feel ashamed. There was no rush of regret, no sharp panic, no immediate need to justify herself. She felt calm. And that was the most dangerous part, because calm meant acceptance. It meant that whatever line they had crossed no longer felt like a mistake, only like a fact. She turned her head slightly, not to look at him, but to confirm that he was still there. He was. Alexander lay on his back, one arm bent behind his head, his gaze fixed somewhere above them. His face was unreadable, not distant, not tender, simply thoughtful, as if he were already tracing consequences in his mind. "This changes things," she said quietly. He didn't answer right away. "Yes," he finally said, "it does." There was no denial in his voice, no attempt to soften the truth. Elena swallowed. "And it doesn't make anything easier." "No," he agreed, "it doesn't." She closed her eyes for a moment. In another version of this night, there would have been promises, words spoken too quickly, attempts to redefine what had just happened into something safer. There were none. That, strangely, felt honest. "I don't want to pretend tomorrow that this was an accident," she said. Alexander turned his head and looked at her then, truly looked. "Neither do I." But neither of them said what it was, because naming it would mean claiming it, and claiming it would mean responsibility. Elena shifted slightly, pulling the sheet higher, not out of modesty, but out of instinct, a small attempt to regain control. "We shouldn't have done this," she said softly. "No," he replied, "we shouldn't have." And yet neither of them moved. The forbidden line had not shattered loudly. It had collapsed quietly. In the way she let him stay, in the way he didn't ask to, in the way neither of them suggested that this should never happen again. Later, much later, Elena lay awake listening to the city outside her window. Somewhere below, a car passed. Somewhere far away, life continued as if nothing had shifted. But inside her, something had. She understood it with frightening clarity. The prohibition no longer protected her. It had become part of the desire. And now there was no way back. Not because she couldn't stop, but because she didn't want to. And that was the real beginning. The morning was too ordinary. That was what frightened her the most. Elena woke up because of the light. Not sharp, not intrusive, but calm, almost gentle. It filtered through the curtains, spreading across the walls, the floor, the edge of the bed. The city outside the window was living its life. Cars, footsteps, distant sounds. Everything continued as if nothing had happened. She lay still, listening to the breathing beside her. Alexander was sleeping on his back, one arm thrown behind his head, as if even in sleep he kept his habit of occupying space with confidence. His face was calm, not tense, not closed, the kind of face people never see during the day. Elena looked at him and felt a strange mixture of emotions. Not tenderness, not fear, and not even regret. Awareness. This was no longer a mistake. A mistake is something you can blame on weakness. This was a decision, made consciously and already irreversible. She carefully got up, trying not to wake him, found her shirt, the same one he had taken off last night without looking, put it on, and went to the kitchen. The apartment met her with familiar silence. The coffee machine hummed too loudly. Elena winced as if the sound could shatter the fragile balance of the morning. She leaned against the counter and closed her eyes. Thoughts began lining up in her head. Work, the office, people, and the fact that what now existed between them could no longer be simply not noticed. She took a sip of coffee and realized she could barely taste it. Alexander woke up later. He understood two things immediately. First, she was no longer asleep. Second, she hadn't left. and for some reason that mattered more than anything else. He sat up, looked around, listened. He heard a quiet sound from the kitchen. Movement, steps, life. Everything was too calm. Not the kind of calm that follows nights people regret. He put on his trousers but didn't bother with a shirt and stepped out. Elena was standing by the window, holding a cup with both hands, as if trying to warm herself. "Good morning," he said. She turned around. For a second, a pause hung between them, the kind where you check whether something has changed. "Good morning," she replied. No reproach, no smile, no defense, and that was harder than any emotion. He stepped closer, but stopped at a distance. Too close for colleagues, too far for people who had just been together. "I don't regret it," he said, first. Not apologizing, not defending himself. Elena looked at him carefully. "Neither do I," she replied after a pause. "And that scares me." He nodded. "Me too." They fell silent. It was an honest silence, without any attempt to smooth the edges. "We can't go on pretending this means nothing," she said. "And we can't pretend this is—" She hesitated, searching for the word. "Normal." "I know," he said. "In the office, it's impossible." "And not only in the office," she added. "You are my superior. You are a man with power, and no matter what you feel, the world will see it differently." Alexander turned toward the window. "I'm not used to having things decided for me," he said quietly. "But I understand what you mean." Elena felt a strange tension build inside her. "Then let's make an agreement," she said, clearly. He turned back to her. "Let's." In the office, nothing. No looks, no pauses, no accidental meetings. We are professionals. Agreed. Outside the office, she took a breath. We don't see each other, for now. That word hung between them. Alexander didn't answer right away. "Are you sure this isn't running away?" he asked finally. "I'm sure it's the only way to keep myself intact and not turn this into something dirty." He looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded. "All right," he said. Then a pause. But there was no ease in his voice. In the office, they were flawless. Elena caught the looks of her colleagues, ordinary, professional, unsuspecting. She answered emails, led meetings, laughed in the right places. Alexander was composed, cold, precise. They passed each other in the corridors and walked past, without stopping, without words. And that was what made the tension almost unbearable, because the band that once protected them now only intensified the desire. In the evening, Elena returned home, and for the first time in a long while felt loneliness as a physical sensation. She took off her shoes, walked into the room, and sat on the edge of the bed. Her phone lay nearby, silent. She wasn't waiting for a message, but she was waiting for him. And that was the main contradiction. She knew it would get harder from here, not easier. Because now between them there was not only the past, there was the present. And the question no longer sounded like, can we or can't we? It sounded different. How much does continuation cost, and is she ready to pay that price? Danger rarely arrives loudly. More often, it comes as small things. Elena didn't notice it right away. First, a colleague's glance lingering a second longer than usual. Then, a conversation that fell silent too quickly when she entered the kitchen. Then, a pause in the assistant's voice when she said that Alexander had asked to reschedule a meeting. Not cancel it, reschedule it. The word was neutral, but Elena felt something tighten inside her. She became more attentive, to herself, to him, to the space between them. At the office, they were still flawless, not a single unnecessary gesture, not a single look that could be interpreted as personal. But the tension didn't disappear. It only grew denser, like air before a storm. Sometimes Elena caught herself thinking a strange thought. If they were less careful, everything would be easier. A secret held too tightly begins to betray itself. Alexander realized the situation was slipping out of control at the moment he was asked to have a conversation. Not officially, without an agenda, without protocol. Just a phrase dropped casually. "We need to discuss one point, confidentially." He knew that tone. That's how people speak, not when they're sure, but when they doubt and want to check. The meeting room was cool. 2 people, a closed door. No accusations, only careful questions. Are you satisfied with the department's performance? Yes. No conflicts of interest observed? No. He answered calmly, evenly, without irritation. But inside, the feeling was different. Not fear of exposure, but irritation that someone had the right to ask such questions. When the conversation ended, he left with the same expression he'd entered with. But one thought echoed in his mind. This is no longer just about us. Alexander understood that the situation was slipping out of control at the moment he was invited for a conversation. Not officially, without an agenda, without protocol. Just a phrase dropped casually. "We need to discuss one matter, confidentially." He knew that tone. It is not used when people are certain. It is used when they doubt and want to check. The meeting room was cool. 2 people, a closed door, no accusations, only careful questions. Are you satisfied with the department's performance? Yes. Do you see any conflicts of interest? No. He answered calmly, evenly, without irritation. But inside, there was a different feeling. Not fear of exposure, but irritation at the fact that someone had the right to ask these questions. When the conversation ended, he left with the same expression he had entered with, but one thought echoed in his mind. This is no longer only about us. Elena learned about it later. Not directly, not from him. She caught a fragment of a conversation in the hallway. Words like review, reputational risks, internal procedures. That was enough. That evening, she did not go home right away. She sat in her car for a long time without starting the engine. The city around her lived its life, indifferent, loud, chujaya. She understood what was happening. When a woman is near a powerful man, she is always the one who is seen first, even if she does nothing, even if she simply exists. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in a long while, allowed herself an honest thought. If this collapses, it will not be him who collapses.
That night, Elena did not sleep. She knew that after this conversation, nothing would resolve itself anymore. Either they would stop hiding, or they would stop existing. The phone lay beside her, silent. And that silence was the most frightening thing of all, because inside it, there was a choice. And a choice is always the end of one story and the beginning of another. Alexander sat in his office, looking out at the city. He was not thinking about risks, not about reputation, not about money. He was thinking about the fact that for the first time in his life, he had found himself in a situation where not everything was allowed. And that was exactly what made it important. He closed his eyes and understood. The next step would change everything. Either he would protect what existed between them at the cost of the world he was used to, or he would let it go, preserving order, but losing meaning. And for the first time in a very long time, he did not know which choice was the right one.
Sometimes the ending does not look like a victory. It looks like silence after tension that lasted too long. Elena understood this in the morning when she woke up without anxiety, without the familiar tightness in her chest, without the feeling that the day would begin with defense. The city outside the window was the same, noisy, alive, indifferent. But something inside her had changed. She was no longer waiting. Not for a message, not for a sign, not for a decision someone else would make for her. She got up, got dressed, left the apartment, and for the first time in a long while, she went to work not as someone who was hiding something, but as someone who knew whatever happened next, she would not disappear. Alexander made his decision at night, not abruptly, not emotionally, and not because he was pushed into it. He was sitting in his office where everything reminded him of power: the desk, the glass walls, the city beneath his feet, the silence in which strategies were usually born. And suddenly he understood the main thing. All his life he had chosen between what was convenient and what was profitable, but never between what was right and what was familiar. He took out his phone, not for her, for the system. The decision was brief, formal, without dramatic words. A structural change, a transfer of authority, a temporary withdrawal from operational control. No heroism, just a step that could not be undone. When he put the phone down, there was no relief inside him. There was a strange, almost unfamiliar feeling. He was no longer hiding behind his power. They met during the day, not by accident and not in secret, in the same city, in the same space, but already in a different reality. Elena entered the room and immediately saw him. He was standing by the window, without tension, without the familiar distance. "You wanted to talk," she said. He turned. "Yes." And in that yes, there was neither pressure nor expectation. "I made a choice," he said. She didn't ask which one. She wasn't waiting for words, she was waiting for the meaning. "I no longer make decisions that could harm you, not directly, not indirectly, not through the system." Elena looked at him attentively. "This isn't about me," she said calmly. "This is about you." He nodded. "Exactly." The pause between them was different now, not dangerous, not charged with prohibition. Honest. "I'm not asking you to stay, and I'm not asking you to begin anything. I just didn't want your choice to become a reaction to my power again." Elena felt something inside her slowly fall into place. "So tell me," she said, "if we remove everything else, who are we?" He didn't answer immediately. Two people who are no longer hiding. She stepped closer, not because she was pulled, but because she could. "I don't promise an easy path," she said. "I'm not looking for an easy one," he replied. And for the first time, there was no fear of consequences between them. They didn't hug, they didn't kiss, they didn't make a single gesture that could be called a finale, because this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning without illusions. Elena left first. Alexander stayed a second longer. And there was no difference in that anymore. Sometimes love is not a night, not a breakdown, not passion that destroys. Sometimes love is the choice not to take immediately, but to make it possible to stay. And if tomorrow something goes wrong, they will answer for it together. Not because everything is allowed to them, but because they chose to be.